Well, as I said earlier, today is going to be very special because during our gala dinner, I think everyone is enjoying the dinner tonight. We will explore more of his perspective on how ASEAN countries adapt in a very dynamic shift in international politics and economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Giorgio. It's actually been an honor for me to sit with you here tonight. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Ibu.
Okay. What do you expect from this International Economic Summit for today?
I remember a conversation with Robert Kwok during the first Trump administration. He said, one reason to live longer is to be able to wake up every morning and to find out what Trump has just said. Trump is dramatic. And in the last few weeks, we have been riveted, sometimes outraged, but always unsettled by some of his ideas and proposals and demands and actions. But he's to be taken seriously. Yes, his negotiating tactics are dramatic and sometimes bullying, occasionally completely unexpected. He respects power. We know that. So when he deals with Putin and Xi Jinping, he's much more careful. But there's a core to Trump, which has not changed since he was a young man. So when we see him, it's important to sweep aside the foam and the lather and say, look, what's inside? He never believed in free trade. And rightly so, because free trade, not managed, can hurt a lot of people and lead to the deindustrialization of entire sectors. I mean, Wall Street may make money by outsourcing, but Middle America may suffer. And one reason for Biden losing was because the middle classes suffered from inflation, while at the top, a small group became unbelievably wealthy. So he's never been in favor of free trade. So his intellectual on trade is Lighthizer, who's written about his beliefs, and they're to be taken seriously. He's never in favor of open borders, which I think is fair. I mean, look at the US and the cities and the problems. He is always pro-business. In all his actions, he has one eye on the stock market. It may dip occasionally, but if it stays down too long, he will switch. But the last part, he's against war, which I think is good. So he'll put an end to the war in Ukraine. I think he doesn't want too much trouble with China. Netanyahu wants him to bomb Iran, but I don't think he will take that bait unless the mullahs behave outrageously.
All right. Before we dive in further to that topic, let me say the prologue first. Sir, the global geopolitical and economic landscape is being reconfigured by a convergence of tectonic structural shifts of an unprecedented magnitude since 1945. Never before has the U.S. seen its prominent positions being so challenged. Never before in modern history had we seen situations where the Western world's monopoly on technology innovation could be considered as a thing of the past. Never before have the existing international order born out of World War II, its rules and institutions, been contested by so many countries led by China, Russia, and to a good extent, India. And there is more to the present reality than what is often depicted as a transition between a unipolar to a multipolar world. In such a very volatile global context fraught with the risk created by the US-China confrontations in almost every domain, with the rise of economic nationalisms, with the negative impact of the fragmentations of the world, What can ASEAN countries do to protect their economic and political interests, and what can they do to have their voice heard, and what is the margins of the maneuver of a middle power country such as Indonesia? That is what we're going to talk about tonight. And since Donald Trump's inaugurations in January, he has continued to threaten new tariffs against key U.S. trade partners, threatened to impose tariffs against Canada, Mexico, China, and just recently with Japan. This has raised concerns over the risk of potential inflationary pressures and greater uncertainty to the global economy. So, Mr. Giorgio, so what impression do you get from the first month of Trump's presidency, and what could make you augur for the period to come? Go ahead.
Well, we're in a great transition to a multipolar world. Many of us in Asia have benefited from long years under Pax Americana, when trade was depoliticized. That period is coming to an end, and we're entering a multipolar dispensation. My own sense is Trump is hastening us in that direction. He's turning inwards. Make America great again. Pull out from international institutions. Europeans, you cough up more money. You don't pay a premium, no insurance. Japan, Korea, everybody is recalculating. So Peter Hegseth, the defense secretary, and Vice President J.D. Vance in Munich shocked the Europeans. They're still reeling from it. They thought the North Atlantic Alliance was bedrock. Now they know it's not. But because they thought it was bedrock, they threw everything onto the table against Russia in Ukraine. And like a kung fu exponent, who see a power of bricks and say, I'm going to smash these bricks, and nothing happened to the bricks. All that force is now reverberating, causing internal injury in Europe, in every country, changing the politics. And then for both J.D. Vance and Hegseth to say nice things about the AfD and interfere in German elections is unbelievable. So Europe will now have to recalculate. I think Europe will be nicer to ASEAN. Europe will recalculate its relationship with China. We have to recalculate, because if the US is turning inwards in order to tackle its internal problems, it will absorb a lot of its energy. Its trade policies will be to help its own economy heal. But it won't be so easy. What we see in the US did not happen overnight. Even if the right things are done today, it will take another 20 years. So the US will go through a prolonged period of difficult internal evolution. Can Trump succeed? I don't know. Because his internal challenges are much more severe than his external challenges. He's going after the deep state, pharmaceutical industry. Elon Musk is wielding battle axe. But you can be sure that there are a lot of people now scheming against Elon Musk, against RFK, and against others. And within the deep state, an internal struggle is going on. So the US will be preoccupied. Trump knows that if the US dollar loses its position, the whole game is lost. So he's threatening BRICS. Anybody who talks about replacing the US dollar, 100% sanction. He betrays a fear. He betrays a vulnerability. He knows it. Because the only way they can sustain the deficit they have is through the US dollar. So China plays a very careful game with BRICS. I think it's interesting that Indonesia has joined BRICS. UAE has joined BRICS. Vietnam has hesitated. And Saudi Arabia decided no need. So everybody is re-triangulating, and we in ASEAN have to re-triangulate. And everything we can to ensure that we'll continue to have peace in the region. We may criticize ASEAN for a million things, for being slow, for being elliptical, for being ineffective, but ASEAN has succeeded in keeping the region peaceful for decades, which enables us to talk about all the things that we're talking about, growth, investments, trade, and so on. If there's no peace, the conversation will be very different.
Well, let's move to another topic, sir. Given China's recent success with DeepSeek AI, which disrupted the market despite US efforts to restrict its access to advanced semiconductors, where is the US expanding technological and strategic containment policy toward China leading, according to you? And do you anticipate increasing friction and confrontations in the near future?
I think the Americans are almost at a loss what they can do to hold back China or slow it down. They try through the CHIP Act, they try on AI, quantum, but the Chinese are producing so many scientists and engineers that they now dominate scientific publications. And this is just the beginning. Their population may be shrinking, but their graduate population continues to grow. And the Gaokao, the examinations for university, it will continue to grow until another 5-10 years, then it will peak. But the number of scientists they are producing, there's no law in physics which says that China cannot master lithography or chip technology. They may be slowed down by a few years. But what China has done with respect to DeepSeek is of profound importance. It used to be, Sam Altman used to say, he told the Indians, you have no chance. It requires so much investment, so much knowledge, forget it. And the Indian businessmen smiled. So the arrival of DeepSeek, developed on a shoestring budget, open source, which means that everybody can now have access to AI, will change the entire marketplace. It is very beneficial to a country like Indonesia. Instead of us being beholden to American oligopolies, hey, it's now available to all of us. I saw my son teaching his grandmother how to use DeepSeek. She will Google her symptoms, and tell the doctors what she thinks. Now with DeepSeek, I think the doctors will have a greater problem. China has decided, instead of letting a few companies dominate AI, let it be available to a whole continent, to everybody. It's changed the game. For the US, this is very troubling. If you can't dominate in AI, if you can't dominate in chip technology for the long term, in quantum computing, then what do you do? So this period, this transition is dangerous because a superpower which fears its dominance being lost may become reckless and adventurous. I don't think Trump will, but Trump will only be there for one term. After that, what happens? We don't know. People say, well, now Trump will move closer to Putin and then concentrate on China. Putin doesn't calculate in terms of 2 years or 4 years. He's seen enough of changes in US policy to know that he must prepare for the long term. And there will be no peace agreement in Ukraine. There will be a ceasefire in 1 to 2 years. But like the Korean Peninsula, like Cyprus, like Kashmir, there'll be no peace agreement for decades to come. Which means that Russia's friendship with China is for the long term. Now, we can't affect any of these things in ASEAN. I think we watch, be cold-blooded in our analysis and say, how do we react? How do we protect ourselves? In fact, how do we benefit from new situations? I mean, we know, for example, that trade tensions between the US and China have benefited us in Southeast Asia. I mean, investments are pouring in, including Chinese investments and American investments. Johor is booming, Vietnam is doing well. If we keep the peace in another generation, Southeast Asia will pole vault into the First World. So our CEP is very important. Keep the region safe. Do not allow the South China Sea to get out of control. Don't get involved in Taiwan. And while China will become more and more important to us, diversify, which means have the US, Japan, India, Europe around. This will keep China honest. And if China bears down on us, well, China will find us becoming friendlier to our rivals. This is the game we play in Southeast Asia.
Well, so as more countries impose tariffs on Chinese goods and introduce export controls against Chinese firms, what do you think about this policy? And can this policy have a chance to achieve its objective of slowing China's technological and economic catching up process? Or is it in fact having the opposite impact of stimulating and accelerations of this process? What do you think about this, sir?
Well, there is concern about the Chinese economy. I think the concerns reflected in the Western media are overblown. You know, China accounts for almost, maybe over 30% of global manufacturing, and will continue to grow. And in terms of tradable manufacturing, it will be closer to 50%. During COVID, the US, Japan, Europe have been printing money. So people could work at home, sometimes pretend to work, and still get paid. And every day waiting for parcels to arrive and say, oh, who ordered this? And then the families will have a conversation, oh, I ordered it, I forgot that I did. Who made all that stuff? It's all made in China. You know, China, when it is organized, you can match it in manufacturing productivity. China's, during COVID, I mean, the prevailing view is that China did badly under COVID. Don't believe that. China did extremely well under COVID. It was the last to open up, which all epidemiologists know is the best strategy, be the last to open up. And they had closed-loop systems, which meant that they continued to manufacture. So in 2020, the trade surplus was $530 billion. In 2021, it rose to $650 billion. In 2022, it reached $850 billion. And was the same the year after. Last year, China's trade surplus reached $1 trillion. So they're printing money. There's a guy at the corner making stuff, collecting all that money. They look at all this money and say, I do not know how much it's worth. I better convert to assets. So they're buying nickel mines, they're buying gold, they're buying plantations, they're buying durian estates. I sometimes think that China's strategy of keeping the renminbi low is to continue accumulating these surpluses and increasing its share of ownership in global assets. Western countries are constantly under inflationary pressure. China is under deflationary pressure. What does this mean? It means that if they want to pump prime, they can. You know, many economists at 5%, they achieve 5%. Don't believe the stats. I disagree. In fact, I had long discussions with Singapore's former chief statistician who worked in the World Bank, and he told me, look, the statistics cannot lie because they come through different parts of the matrix. So you can counter-check the growth numbers through power production, through export, through many things. The reason why they can manage those numbers is because they can pump prime. They have the ability to pump prime. Real estate has dampened the mood. because it's 30% of the economy. And for as long as there's no bottom, everybody held back. But a bottom has formed. And once a bottom has formed, business people know how to calculate. I think going ahead now, China will begin to pump prime a little more. They're watching what Trump will do because they're keeping their powders dry. So I don't take such a pessimistic view of China. And in our calculation, it's important to have the right assessment of China. It's an opportunity, but it also be a problem. Because Chinese companies are so competitive, it will create political problems in all countries. It is bound to be a reaction. You take EVs. EVs are, you know, during the years of COVID, when the rest of the world was in the army, we say, "Entak kaki," you know, we are walking on the spot. They continue to make progress. Huawei continued to make progress. And when China reopened, people were shocked. And today, when they look at Chinese EVs, they say, wow, they're years ahead of us. The Chinese Foreign Ministry knows that EVs will be a political problem. And I was told that in the recruitment of diplomats, one of the requirements for some of the recruitment is they must have knowledge in the EV industry, because they know that when the diplomats go overseas, they will have to address this as a political problem.
Well, so then what can ASEAN countries do to avoid becoming the collateral casualties of these confrontations with its negative impact on technology transfer and investment flows?
No, I see China as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us in Southeast Asia. China is homogeneous. When it's organized, it's always the largest economy in the world, and certainly in our region. I'm an amateur student of history. I mean, Indonesian history cannot be studied without reference to China's dynastic cycles. It's not possible. Sriwijaya, it was the Tang dynasty. Then Kublai Khan came along. No, before that, it was the Southern Song. Southern Song was like 40% of the global economy. The Cholas came, destroyed Sriwijaya in one monsoon. And the historians now believe it was because they wanted their share of the China trade. Then you had Kublai Khan. He wanted to punish Singosari. Mayhem in Java. Majapahit rose. Malacca rose. Ming Dynasty. The great voyagers came. All the sultans went to Nanjing to pay tribute, to get access. Majapahit's currency was Chinese copper coins. So we cannot understand Indonesian history without reference to the rise and fall of Chinese dynasties. And Indonesia's future is inseparable from what happens on the Chinese mainland. So we have to study it very carefully. And if Indonesia is to achieve 8% growth, a large part of it we have to from Chinese trade, Chinese tourism, Chinese investments. Because China accounts for over a third of global growth. And I think in our region, probably over 40% of regional growth. And if Indonesia wants to achieve 8%, Chinese trade and investments may have to account for close to half. So in our strategizing here, whether China is a threat, an opportunity, a problem, or a good thing, we have to study very carefully. And since Indonesia plays such a pivotal role in ASEAN, and China wants ASEAN as a friend, not as an enemy, Indonesia should negotiate that in return for keeping ASEAN friendly to China, without being subservient to China, we require China to do certain things for us. I think the Chinese will take this bait because the strategic importance of ASEAN to China in the period of superpower conflict with the US is so great we can get something out of it. And Indonesia should think carefully how to get the most out of it. But of course, doing in a way which keeps the Americans in the archipelago, the Japanese, the Indians, and everybody. But don't forget, every major power is now re-triangulating and recalculating because the US is turning inwards.
We kindly invite two people, if you have some questions to ask to Mr. Giorgio, please. Okay, can you mention your name and where you're from? And we have another one.
Thanks, George. I'm Brian Wong. I teach philosophy and geopolitics at the University of Hong Kong, and an old friend of George, and an honor to be an old friend of yours. My question is about our understanding of geopolitics beyond states. And that is to say, we tend to spend a lot of time pontificating over the US, China, India. All of these are nation states, so to speak, George, in our analysis of international relations. And yet, from the rise of Elon Musk's X and Tesla and the Boring Company and whatnot, all the way through to the targeting of companies over the Panama Canal, through to the outsized influence of corporations, not just in money politics, but in international politics. Is there not a worry that we are neglecting the bigger picture in the 21st century, that international geopolitics is increasingly going to feature, non-state actors, powerful commercial actors, MNCs, investors, whose influence rivals that, if not surpasses that of individual states? And therefore, for true world peace and a true understanding of multipolarity, we have to talk about the role and limits of the roles of corporations in this picture. What do you reckon? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Judge, you can answer, please.
Under the Pax Americana, Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Dutch financial capitalism dominated the world. So you could outsource, you have free trade. Wall Street became very important. With the relative decline of the US, financial capitalism will go through an evolution. I don't think China will ever allow its capital markets to be freely open. Neither India, neither continental Europe. So we have to get used to a messier world, where many issues cannot be determined top-down, but we have to be determined bottom-up, which means by enterprises, small enterprises, medium enterprises, corporations, struggling to make a living, seeking out opportunities. You take, say, Singapore and Johor and Capri. Singapore is so expensive. I have a house in Johor, I go there quite often now because to get a car on the road in Johor is 1/10 the price of that same car in Singapore. Petrol is 1/3 the price. Food is 1/3 the price. Property is 1/10 the price. If you go to Batam, Bintan, Karimun, the cost arbitrage potential is even greater. So water will find its own level. And even if governments don't have big projects, I think the business people will find their own responses to opportunities. Now, governments can make life difficult for them. But why should government make life difficult for them? And all over Asia, where domains intersect, there are new opportunities. And the private sector will find ways and means. Recently, I wanted to take the high-speed rail from Vientiane to Luang Prabang to Kunming. And when I was chairman of Carrier Logistics, working for Robert Kwok, I was looking at investing in a dry port in Vientiane because the Thais were taking their time connecting Vientiane to Bangkok by rail. So my old partner, he now runs it for somebody else. So I visited him. Every day, hundreds of trucks from Thailand, Nong Khai, Vientiane, the containers put on trains straight to China. And you could smell durians in the air. because the Chinese have decided they love durians. And they need billions of fruits every year. So all of Southeast Asia will benefit. Right now, they prefer Thai durians. But once they shift to Malaysian and Indonesian durians, Singaporeans will have stiff competitors. But one example, you look at the complementarity in Asia. China is dry. China is cold. China lacks agricultural land. China is aging. You look at Southeast Asia, tanah di bawah angin. Everywhere you can grow stuff. There's no place which is so cold or so high that habitation is not possible. We are young. We have plenty of water. And we're in the same time zone. Now, can you imagine if the Chinese become middle class and they want to avoid the winters? Where do Americans go to? They go down first to Florida, then to the Caribbean, then to Mexico. The Europeans, first to the Balearics, then to Turkey, then to Dubai, and so on. Where would the Chinese come to? Here. Right now is Hainan and Sichuan-Panna. But they cannot compare with the beautiful islands, the limpid waters, the beautiful beaches that we have here in the region. Friendly people, same time zone, good food. I think we can expect millions of Chinese, if they are allowed, to own homes in Indonesia in the coming years. Do we welcome it? There will be a political reaction sooner or later. So we must anticipate the problems, make sure they know that they have to be on good behavior. We must have rules and regulations in place to protect local people so that every Chinese who comes here is a blessing to us and not a pain to us. It requires skillful management. I think it can be done. And if you can do it well, the complementarity between Southeast Asia and China will be profound.
Well, thank you, Mr. Giorgio. We kindly invite one last question from participants here. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Okay.
Hi, Julia from the Institute for Southeast Asia Studies. My pleasure to listen to the person, Mr. Rio. I followed your idea. One of the analogy of ASEAN. Yeah. Thank you. One of the analogy that you use for ASEAN is one of that of a preferred driver. We are not necessarily the fastest. Sometimes we are a bit awkward, but we are preferred because everyone knows we'll get them to the shared destination, not somewhere that they don't want to be, if you like. My question, just to go straight to the point, is that in today's context, do you think such shared destinations still exist? How does it look like? And by whom will it be shared by? And I guess most importantly, do you think ASEAN can still be that preferred driver? Thank you.
There is no other driver. You can't have India driving, you can't have China driving, you can't have Australia driving, you can't have China driving. We are the only ones. We're the only one who qualifies. And the key is we must not be divided. We may not be very united, but we must not be divided. We must not be balkanized. Vietnam had antagonistic relations with China. About 2 years ago, I was invited to speak in Hanoi at the Diplomatic Academy. They held a special meeting to discuss the 20th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. I was intrigued, so I accepted the challenge. And then I sensed that they were shifting gear. And a few months later, they announced that they were going to link Hanoi to Kunming and Nanning by high-speed rail. You know, the French wanted to access inner China on the Mekong. But above Cambodia, there were cataracts, the Cone Falls. They could not get around that. It's interesting reading Moho's exploration of the Mekong in the 19th century. So in the end, what the French did was they went to Hanoi and through the Red River Valley, 2 narrow gauge rail, one to Kunming, one to Nanning. Now both will be high-speed rail, each billions of dollars. And a few months ago, Vietnam announced that it's going to connect Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City by high-speed rail. Now this will transform Vietnam. I mean, Indonesia should not delay on linking Jakarta to Surabaya. Get this done quickly. Of course, it will be open competition. But I think it's difficult for the Japanese or the Europeans to offer a better deal to Vietnam for this high-speed connection. Whether Vietnam agrees to Chinese construction depends on politics. So Vietnam has decided that its future cannot be separated from China, but it's not comfortable with China. Therefore, it needs ASEAN. And last year, I was invited again by the Diplomatic Academy to Vietnam. And this time for them to inaugurate an annual ASEAN Future series of seminars. So I said in my speech, we must create a positive agenda for the South China Sea, so that the South China Sea is not a zero-sum game, but it will be like the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, it's about the same size, you know. I mean, from Singapore to Manila, it's shorter than from Barcelona to Istanbul. The Mediterranean is thinner, the South China Sea is fatter, but we should think of the South China Sea as a commons linking all of us living on its shores together. I'm in favor of bringing Hainan, which is from this year, a special economic zone requiring you to clear immigration to go to the Chinese mainland, to have some special relationship with ASEAN. That the entire South China Sea unites us and not divide us. Now that's very important, because if we do not allow Southeast Asia to be divided, then we may not get top marks for everything, but it will be a wonderful future for all of us.
Okay, I know we have a very limited time. Can we have more 5 minutes? Because I have a very important questions, one more important questions for Mr. Giorgio. If the present US-China confrontation leads to a more profound decoupling and the emergence of 2 big economic blocks or ecosystems, one gravitating around the United States and the other around China, what would be the consequences for ASEAN countries, and more specifically for countries such as Indonesia, please?
Can you repeat the question?
What would be the consequences for ASEAN countries, and more specifically for countries such as Indonesia, if the present US-China confrontations leads to a more profound decoupling and the emergence of 2 big economies, United States of America and China?
No, it will be a multipolar world. China will be by far the world's biggest economy. The US will still be very important and the most advanced. There'll be India, there'll be Europe, there'll be Japan. And we should be able to cari makan, you know, to make a living by arbitraging, by trading, by serving others. Let me take Singapore. Singapore makes a living by serving others. The day we stop serving others, we lose our food. So our attitude must be, how can I serve other people? Then I will make a living. I have natural resources. I have good agricultural land. I have energy. How can I benefit you? If I benefit you, I benefit myself. And if there's conflict between the two of you, well, maybe I can even improve my position because I have competition. I remember during Konfrontasi, I was in primary school. I had an Indonesian neighbor. All trade between Indonesia and Singapore was cut off. But they went through Hong Kong. And during the Indochina War, you could get Tonglei subfish in Singapore markets. And through the Teochew Hawala system, you could negotiate credit in Singapore and get it in Phnom Penh. We are a spry people in Southeast Asia. We are used to dealing with people of different colors, religions, languages, and we find a way to make a living, and we must not lose this instinct.
Thank you, Mr. Giorgio, for the insightful sharings. Can we have a round of applause, a big round of applause for Mr. Giorgio? Thank you very much for your time. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Singapore, 2004 until 2011. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause? Could you please kindly stay on stage? Please join me in expressing our appreciation for our esteemed speaker and moderator for their invaluable insights. And now we are proceeding to a token of appreciation will be presented by Indonesia Business Council. For that, we'd like to kindly invite Mr. Sofyan Jalil. Could you please kindly present the token to our esteemed speaker and moderator? Ladies and gentlemen, can we have another big round of applause for one-on-one discussions and insightful insight from Mr. Giorgio, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Singapore, 2004 to 2011. Can we have a group photo? Can we have a photo? Yes, photo session in 3 of you. Once again, thank you so much to Mr. Giorgio for your time. Mr. Sofyan Jalil.